everybody. I'm from up in San Francisco, and let's see, I've been in this industry for about 3 decades now. I was one of the founders of Adaptive Path, and I've written a couple of books, and I teach a bunch of courses online. And my aim, you shall see in this presentation, is to try to bring us to the next level of maturity in software design, experience design, product design, and I think there's a lot that we can do. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I love hearing from people, and I'm got a final slide in this deck that has a discount code for any Rosenfeld Media book. It also shows where to find me. I sent Christina the slide deck so you can download it, refer to it if you need to. I think we're gonna be able to access the recording too at any point in the time in the future. So if, like, your kids or your pets interrupt, no big deal. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started then and share my screen. So I've got this set of visuals that I like to work with when I'm trying to explain what we're up against and what we can do about it. So this is a talk that's all about the 4 Ps: people, purpose, patterns, and problem space. And the whole impetus behind this is that I want to see us get to the next level of digital maturity. We kind of began decades ago by writing software for other engineers and scientists. We would just sort of figure out what the standard operating procedure was, and we'd turn it into an algorithm that they could then use, so that now the computers would do the grunt work, so to speak, and the humans were left to do more of the creative stuff or the thinking stuff. That changed a little bit when we started writing software for people who weren't other scientists or engineers. But that same idea of like, oh, well, there's this one algorithm we can reduce it all to, and try to figure out that simplistic way of doing it that would fit everybody, and we'll launch that. And along that path, we ran into a few problems. We have a problem right now of misinformation and disinformation, which is coming from the unintended consequences of things like what Google's doing, what Facebook is doing, what all these types of social media allow to happen on their platforms, misinformation and disinformation specifically. And this is very harmful to our democracy. It's harmful around the world. It's not just us. And in addition to that, I'd like to kind of classify things as we've got a lot of experiences out there that are frustrating, and we have experiences also that are harmful. In terms of frustrating, it could just be that, it's clearly not the thing that was meant for me, but I'll try to use it because I need to use it, because that's the only thing I can think of to solve the purpose that I have in mind. But with regard to harm, there's a lot to it. And I want to show you some examples, but the idea is that we have been harmed in a lot of ways, especially systemically. There are groups of people who carry this load of systemic discrimination, and it happens in the digital world also. We totally can stop doing that. We can find out about it and design for it. But let me run through a couple of examples. This is an example of mild harm. This is an advertisement for Bright sellers, where they're apparently going to convince you to let them ship you wine every week or something. But it's all like, well, you fill out this little quiz and you just tell them what kind of your chocolate you love and what your favorite tea, the way you take your tea, and what your favorite juice is, and what your go-to cocktail. And, right off the bat, this ad excludes people. It excludes people who don't drink cocktails or drink juice or tea or chocolate or whatever, right? It also excludes people who don't have favorites, who can't explain what their favorite is. And that's mild. It's very mild. Somebody who doesn't see themselves here probably won't become one of their customers. And that's an interesting point of view that bright sellers just sort of missed. Here's a little bit more along the lines of serious harm. This happens to be on the left, a screen of Tesla 3. And it's like a piece of glass, right, with a bunch of software underneath it. And as you're driving along, if you need to like bring up the map or something like that, turn on the air conditioning, you have to look at that screen, find where the hit zone is on the button, and try to make your finger hit it while you're wobbling around, bouncing up and down on the road, right? So people are like, oh my God, we need haptic feedback on this thing, because you're supposed to have your eyes on the road. Even, we do take our eyes from the road to do some things, but it's got to be quick. So the debate has raged as far as on the right there, Mazda released their current version of a touchscreen without it actually being touchable. There is some sort of a hack where you can make it respond to a touch, but see the dials below that screen, they're all like, okay, we're going back to dials because this is dangerous. But the even more insidious harm is the systemic harm. And this is a picture of Joy Walamini back when she was at MIT doing her initial work on testing facial recognition software, and it wouldn't recognize her face. She got the idea to put a white mask on, and suddenly it was recognizing her face as a human. She's like, what the? It turns out she tested a whole bunch of them, figured out that they were having trouble because they were not fed data from people who were of dark skin or people who were having female faces, or even facial features that were not typical of the group of people or group of photos from Silicon Valley that it was fed. So she wrote a paper about it. She wrote a couple of papers. She created something called the Algorithmic Justice League, and she's actually made a difference. So one thing is that we've got these CCTV all over various cities. We've got them in stores, and the software companies were selling their facial recognition to these groups to help identify like the people who did something bad. So there have been numerous cases where people have been arrested for something, and generally it has been stealing a candy bar. They've been arrested for that based on facial recognition connection. So I've got 3 different articles. This was a guy in Detroit, Robert Williams, who was arrested and spent the night in jail until they realized it was a bad match. This is a guy, Michael Oliver in Detroit, and he has since pressed charges or sued, I guess, the group that arrested him. And then this is in New Jersey, and this is Najir Parks, and he actually, I think, spent 10 days in jail. He's also suing the county, whatever they're called, because, wow, this is a huge chunk out of a person's life where it was all because of software making a bad match. He was not the person who stole the candy bar. And so here is Joy Walamini more recently. This is her in Fast Company in August of 2020. And she is one of like 8 people that they highlighted that month as people in tech who are really making a difference. And I like to emphasize her story because she is an individual. She's not like a big company or a big organization that has made a difference. She's an individual. Maybe she's got an organization now, the Algorithmic Justice League, and she's got help getting the word out, but she is actually making a difference. And there are some really great articles around that. But I like it because it causes hope. It gives us the idea that, yes, we can do something, because what we're experiencing is dangerous, it's harmful. And it's going to crop up again and again if we don't take responsibility for it. And we are perfectly positioned as user experience people, as product managers, as directors, as people involved in the design and creation of digital experiences and digital services. So the question then is, if we want to take responsibility, it means having deeper goals. It means being able to recognize and remove when we're making assumptions and bias. It means that we're going to have to hunt to try to find the things that we aren't seeing, and I'm going to explain all of this. And it also means we need to support a lot of different perspectives. Right now, a lot of digital experiences represent only the perspective of the people on the team and very few other perspectives. So how is it that you take this responsibility and you go deeper in your org? And the biggest answer is that we make time. And I just want to call out that word, the verb make, as opposed to the word take. We are creators. We create things. We make things. So we know how to make all sorts of things happen. Time is one of them. Time is within our ability. And it's going to be different for everybody, right? Different ways of persuading, different ways of taking the time. And I've got a lot of examples of that in the courses that I teach. But this is what we're good at. We're good at making things. So for the rest of this hour, I want to talk about these 5 things. The first one is a couple of those P words that I used in the title of this talk, which is person, purpose, and problem space. So let's dive into that. The first 2 are pretty big sections of this. The last 2 are pretty small sections of this talk. So never fear if I get 40 minutes into it and you're like, oh my gosh, she's only gotten to point 3. So this is a diagram that I've been improving since 2015. I've been working on it, iterating on it, learning from people, figuring out what words make sense. And essentially what I'm trying to do here over on the right-hand side is represent the way a typical software organization or design organization or product or service organization creates their products. What I have drawn out with all those circles there is an existing methodology called continuous dual track. You can replace it with whatever methodology you use at your org, maybe jobs to be done or some mix of lean and jobs to be done or something. But the idea is that you've got loops going where you're trying to figure out what to create, coming up with prototypes about those ideas, testing things, trying to figure out how to get it into product development, putting it maybe in a product backlog, maybe making user stories that go along with that, or prototypes, or both. And it kind of runs like that. What happens is that these development cycles, these design and development cycles tend to be crushed into very short time spans where we're all, everyone is feeling it. We're like, no, this is not the way it's supposed to be, but this is the way that somebody up there who's trying to make our organization successful thinks that this is the way we need to do it. And with regard to the success of the organization, speed is just one of the dials that we can play with. The other thing that I want to point out is that with respect to this hurriedness, when we do these, like, let's come up with these ideas, sometimes we will do co-creation with people. Sometimes we will go out and test prototypes. We'll do like really short research bursts that are sort of time bounded, and therefore It makes it difficult for us to actually analyze what we've got. It makes it difficult for us to set these things up correctly so we'll get good data. So there we are. That's the situation. And most people will say, well, how can I fit anything else in there? You said I can make time, but I don't really have that kind of ability. And I want to talk about that in just a second. The other thing that I want to point out, though, on this right-hand side, is I'm calling it the solution space. This is where we're coming up with ideas. Ideas are solutions. We're prototyping them and developing them and tweaking them. And this is the realm in which we call the people that we're trying to support users. Now, some people don't like calling them users, they call them customers, or like a word that works with your industry, like passenger or member or patron, that kind of a thing. But no matter what noun you're using, this is a person who has a relationship to your organization or a potential relationship to your organization. And this is important. When we hear ourselves saying the word user or customer or whatever other noun it is, we are very specifically speaking about people who are in relationship to our org and our product. This will come up again in just a few seconds. First, though, I want to look in the middle there on that diagram. That's the part that's brown that's called strategy. And this is the place where the organization is trying to figure out what direction to take everyone so that they will remain successful, so that they can stay alive, so that maybe they can make a profit, or maybe they can support more people, or maybe both. And so sometimes they have like a backlog of ideas that they've come up with that they think that they'd like to do, or things they'd like to change. Maybe new markets that they'd like to explore. And this is something that often you don't get very much insight into. Sometimes it's owned by the executives. And what I'd like to see is that becomes something that is more research-based. So over there in the problem space on the left-hand side, that's where we're trying to understand a person, not somebody with a relationship with our org, but a person who's trying to solve their own purpose, who may reach for our tool in addition to a bunch of other tools that they can apply toward their purpose. And out of that loop there of research, where I listen, develop empathy, and find patterns, I create two types of things that are long lasting. These things last for decades. Clients that I've worked with decades ago have kept adding to theirs and keep using them. And that is an opportunity map and thinking styles. I'm going to explain that in maybe 20 minutes. So just so you can see, that's where it comes from. But I want to talk a little bit about this word purpose. Purpose, I am coming to see, is a very, very clarifying lens for understanding people. And there's a few reasons for that. First of all, what is a purpose? A purpose is something that someone's trying to achieve. They might be doing it over time and making progress on it little by little, or it might be a very discrete thing that they accomplish in one go. It might be something that they are purchasing. It might be something that they're using. It might be something that they're planning. It might be something that they're learning. It's all these different things. It can be anything. But the idea is that you can have a purpose that my org can support very specifically, or that is something that a different sort of a tool might support. So let me give you an example. Here I've got it laid out like that original diagram. And if we look at the bottom, let's look at this example of vacation lodging. I switch examples from talk to talk so that everything isn't the same. So with vacation lodging, over in the problem space, you might be thinking about taking a vacation somewhere like Paris, right? And you're like, I want to know what it's like to live like a local there. And I want to like see what the different neighborhoods are like, or, you know, insert your own vacation dream spot. Maybe instead it's It's about your history or your family's history there, and you're going to go back to that place and sort of touch base with it, or even look up long lost aunts and uncles, or farther afield cousins, and you might be thinking about deciding how long does it make sense to stay there, how long would it take to accomplish these things, a lot of other things like balancing out how long it takes to get there versus how long I'll stay there, etc. These can all be solved with a variety of different tools, including like talking to your parents, or your friends, or looking at travel magazines, or listening to podcasts, or watching different shows about different places. There's all sorts of ways to solve this over time. When you look in the solution space over there on the right, let's say that you are some sort of a service like Airbnb or like VRBO, where you have places that people can stay. Maybe you're somebody else, like you have packages, like bike packages or something like that, where people can go biking for a while. So in that respect, you as a person still have a purpose of like, well, is that place available for these dates, or what dates is that place available? And I want to make sure that it works for me. I want to make sure that I can bring my dog, or that I can bring my wheelchair in there. I want to make sure that it's close to the activities that we want to do, or how it fits in with the whole chain of places that I want to go to. So there are some purposes also that are related very specifically to a solution. Now, you notice I mentioned 3 different types of solution. So not just your solution. So purposes in the problem space mean that you can solve it using a lot of different tools, like even mental tools and social tools, printed magazine tools, all that sort of thing. Purposes in the solution space is generally thought of through the lens of your own solution, the one that you as a team are working on. And this is a little bit of a limiting lens, which is both good and bad, but you want to be able to recognize which side you're on, and you want to do research in both areas. So I've got a little quick series here to kind of help illustrate that. What we've got here in the center is a person who has a thought bubble with inner thinking in it, a heart with their emotional reactions in it, and a scale with all their guiding principles that they use to make decisions about the purpose that they're doing. Here, the purpose is growing something. And in that dial around them, they can switch it up and like look at their memory, or look at something they learned in college, or talk to their neighbor, or buy a shovel and do something manually, or look it up on YouTube. I just had to look up how to winter prune fruit trees on YouTube, right? Maybe turn on some tunes while you're actually doing the work of that purpose. And yeah, maybe there would be some sort of a thing that your organization created that is very specific for this purpose. And so there's your solution sitting there. But a lot of these other tools have other orgs sitting behind them. So when your org thinks of its market and its competition, oftentimes it only thinks of the ones that are doing something very similar to it. So like a university thinks of their competition as other universities. They aren't thinking like a little bit farther down the line. So it's interesting to see how we can broaden our thinking just with this thought experiment. However, often I will run across organizations that put themselves at the center, and then they surround themselves with marketing data. And they're like, okay, so let's look at people who are age 50 to 75, who are urban and have a bachelor's degree and have kids and love Hermes scarves, or, whatever, right? And it's like, this is not related to the purpose. The purpose isn't in the picture at all. And without that purpose, we're not going to get an understanding of a person that makes sense. It'll be anecdotal. It'll be one-off. There will be no patterns. So back to this, this is another way that people are starting to look at it. They will put a user at the center, but that user is just the generic user, the member, the patron, whatever noun that we're using. And we're still looking at it only through the lens of our solutions. We're only looking at the right-hand side of those purposes. And we forget to explore all those other purposes that we might also support, that we might also find different thinking styles in, where when we look closely, we find that we're only supporting one thinking style, and we could certainly support other thinking styles. And that's a way to open up our market. The other thing that's interesting about purpose is that there are other related purposes, and we could explore the related purposes. Maybe this person who's growing something wants to start providing food for a large number of people. Maybe they just bought their first house and they want it to look pretty in the neighborhood, or wow their neighbors or their parents or whatever. Maybe they want to be out in nature more. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at a purpose and related purposes. That's another way that your org can start to explore understanding different people's perspectives. And in addition, even within one purpose, you will have different thinking styles. So if you're growing something, let's say you're going to farm things for like you and your neighbors and your block or something, and you might have like this sustainable environmental sort of thinking style, or you might have like, I want to become really large scale and it's not just my neighbors and my block, or you might have something like it's got to be pretty, or you might have a thinking style about it doesn't, I have a full-time job. This can't take a lot of time. Or even a thinking style where like, you know, I'm only going to use methods that we have used over the last 1,000 years and nothing new, because what's worked before will work again. So that's the idea of like, you know, we can certainly open up the way that we're thinking about things, rather than just taking one slice of it, our own little aperture, and looking through that in terms of the solution that we have already created. And then this also allows us to bring more respect to that person who's trying to accomplish their purpose, to bring more understanding, or gather more understanding of their approach and their thinking style, so that we might support those as well. So you might be thinking, well, good Lord, the kinds of purposes that Indi has been using in her examples, they seem so random. There could be millions of them, and that's true. There could be millions of them. So that doesn't mean that we can't start. That doesn't mean that we can't find the place that we are in right now as a team and say, okay, what do we know about this so far, and where can we start mapping from here? There is a computer science puzzle or game thing that they teach, where they talk about hill climbing. And if the idea is that you are parachuted into a mountain range and you're supposed to get to the top of the tallest hill, how do you do it when it's all covered in fog and you don't have a map and there's no satellites? So you start walking in some direction and you start making measurements as you walk. But there's also kind of like maybe that goal of getting to the top of the hill is not the right goal. Maybe the goal should be to find water. So what is the goal that we're after? And let's be careful about that so that we're not climbing the wrong hill. So this idea of mapping it out, starting to map it out, it's foggy. You can start sketching things. You know where you are now pretty well, but you might be unaware of some different thinking styles. And let's ask ourselves, hey, what is it that we don't see right now? What do we need to know? And how risky is it that we don't know that? If it's not risky, we don't need to go find out more about it. But if it's risky at all, and you get to define risk, then you get to ask yourselves, well, what are we going to do to try to build that knowledge? Which is a great segue into building knowledge. So ordinarily, we've got people who are trying to look for knowledge and have taken a lot of business courses, have come from a university where they're taught from a business or economics point of view. And it's really pretty much market research that they turn to build their knowledge. All of us here know that there's more to it, that we can also look in other ways to build knowledge. We have all sorts of techniques that we have in evaluative research. We also have techniques within generative research that we're aware of. I'm going to show some more detail on that. But just to kind of show that it's almost as if it depends on where your degree comes from and what your field was, that you will turn to certain kinds of research. And so those people who come from the business background, Sam Ledner writes about this in her book, Mixed Method, it's almost as if they only turn to the market research, and they're the ones who tend to be telling the rest of us, oh, go do a such and such study, because that's what they taught me in school to ask for. So a little bit of our responsibility is to say, well, there are other ways of building knowledge. In addition to generative and evaluative, there's also opportunity research. And in addition to that, there's the idea of looking at a person's purpose to be able to get a better understanding of what we can support. So let me dive into this a little bit more. With respect to market research, what's coming out of it is almost always targeting, it seems. I know there's probably more to that, but I can have opinions. What's coming out of our opportunity generative and evaluative research is the ability to lessen people's frustration with the tools that we're building for them, lessen our harm to other people, reduce our team's bias, by being able to give ourselves a broader perspective, a clearer picture, sketch things out and get that fog gone, at least, a few more yards away from us, and create differing support for differing thinking styles. I'll get back to this in a moment. And then being able to increase your market without these sort of violent words like being disruptive. Like targeting is kind of violence word too. So zooming in on those three parts, opportunity, generative, and evaluative, with that lens of the people's purpose, if we're using people's purpose to look into doing some sort of data collection, we can use it in all three of these areas. Super quick, starting on the right, moving to the left. Evaluative is all about understanding an existing solution in order to improve it somehow. Generative is creating new ideas for a system or a process so that we can support people who use it or do it better. And then opportunity research is a more holistic approach where we are trying to understand all those different tools that people use, including the social and the mental tools and the manual tools, in order to support a broader set of thinking styles. And this is also called a couple of other words in other fields. Like in ethics, they call this the futures cone. It's also been referred to as foundation or exploratory research. And what I have crossing across both of those is qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative has mostly to do with thoughts and words of people. Quantitative is generally data that got collected. It's not just numeric. It can be also, paths and things that people take through websites. It's data that got collected. It's not data that you ask somebody about. And then you do some analysis on it. So all of these little cards in here that cross over the different areas are data collection techniques. And this is a super fun map to print out. And with your team, sort of circle the ones that you work with your product managers. Kind of circle the ones that they are familiar with, or even create a map of market research tools so that they can see that their circles tend to be over there. I haven't done that. But this is a really fun way of sort of being able to, without blaming each other, say, oh yeah, this is what we do. And that, you know, those are some things that we could do that might help us. Or maybe we don't need help there right now. Maybe we just need to focus in more on the evaluative area, but use some more of these tools. So I just drew some ovals that generally collect user research versus usability research versus big data. So that's a fun way of looking at this. But this is I think it's an eye-opening diagram because it helps us see, like, within our teams and across our org, how we're seeing things differently and how we're going about creating knowledge differently. Because remember, it's all about trying to understand what we don't know so that we can broaden our perspectives, so we can do a better job supporting people. Just to tie it back to that original diagram, what's coming out of the opportunity research, the generative research, and the evaluative research is what's going into our strategy. Mostly opportunity goes into the strategy, and generative and evaluative go into the solution space. So that first part that I call problem space, and I'm always iterating on these. The problem space is pointing really at, is one and the same as that opportunity research space, where I've got the listening sessions. They're also called empathy interviews and non-directed interviews. So you may have heard of some of those. So that's the first part. And yeah, we have had some minutes go by. So let's take a look at the next part. I'm hoping you're scribbling questions down in the chat window so we can go through those at the end.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
We have some questions.
Do you want to stop and do some super quick questions right now while we
well, there was a question from Hillary. Hillary, I'll just go ahead and...
Hey, Indy.
Hey.
Hey, I was in your class briefly and then I got super swamped with work and I had to drop out, but I love your style. I was curious to know how you differentiate purpose and goal, because when I do personas, I talk a lot about the goals of these specific users, and obviously it's all about building empathy.
Yeah, there's no reason to differentiate. I tend not to use the word goal because goal has baggage within, like, it has meaning within some of the methodologies, and I don't want to limit it just to those meanings. So one of the things you'll hear me say a lot is use the word that makes sense in your own org. It's perfectly fine to use the word goal if that makes sense. Cool. Any other questions?
Thank you so much.
Yeah. There's not, I'm going to go on.
There is one question that just came in. Are there other methods to get an opportunity research besides the non-directed interview?
Probably. I haven't encountered them. I have personally done essays where I get people to write me essays about it instead of doing non-directive interviews. It's harder to do it that way. And I have helped people mine, like, customer service recordings for this, but the problem is that purpose lens isn't there. And what I'm going to talk about next is that without that lens, without that, you're not going to get patterns. And without patterns, you don't get valid data. You've got a bunch of anecdotes, and that doesn't help. So that's actually a great segue into this next section, which is working to remove the bias and assumptions, which, believe it or not, is all about doing doing research in a way that really respects people. And So here's a list of different types of empathy. When we use the word empathy, it's just shorthand for one of these. These are the words that they use in psychology and therapy. They're the longer ways of saying empathy, and there's different types. So the type of empathy that I use is cognitive empathy, which is very specifically trying to get at somebody's inner voice, trying to understand what their thought process was, what reactions they had, what those reactions set off, right? They cause more thinking, they cause more reactions, and what guiding principles they use to help them make decisions as they're going toward making progress on their purpose. So in a listening session, when you are listening to somebody, even just in real conversation, life, right? There's such a thing as surface versus depth. And you'll see that here at Surface, I have listed something called explanation, which is typical in a lot of the research that we do. Explanation, how or what. What am I doing, right? And maybe some scene setting around it, and maybe some generalization about it, maybe your opinion and your preference, or some statements of facts. And this, while you do need it, it is not depth. You do not understand what a person's thoughts have been about their purpose. You only understand what that person is explaining to you about the process. And remember, in the beginning, we used to make algorithms about processes. Now, what I want us to do is make algorithms to support people's approaches. So we need depth. Depth is specifically cognitive empathy. It is inner thinking, emotional reactions, and guiding principles. And so that's why I go to depth when I am trying to do data collection. And you can get to depth using all sorts of different data collection techniques. You can even get to depth if you're asking people to do a diary study, or if you're doing co-design with people. So there is this idea of surface versus depth, which is really important. I will take, some clients will hire me to take their interview data and go through it, and I'll point out where we've got depth and where we don't. In a listening session that I've conducted, or anybody that I've taught, we generally get between 40 and 120 concepts at depth, which is different than those interviews that I've been looking at, where we get 4 to 16 concepts at depth. And those are both for like about an hour's worth of somebody talking to us. And it's only because of the way that we've conducted it and the way we've framed it around a purpose. So when I am listening, it is not directed. I don't have a list of questions. I follow somebody. I ask a germinal question. What went through your mind the last time you were doing X, right? Trying to find a vacation, set up a vacation, and everything that goes through your mind, and everything, like when you mention some opinions or something, like where did that opinion come from? When you mention some preferences, where did that come from? I'm like digging around trying to find what's underneath it, so that I'm getting inner thinking, emotional reactions, and guiding principles. Sometimes the guiding principles you really have to dig up, but you don't bring up vocabulary or concepts that somebody has not mentioned. You don't do that because you want it to be their mind. It is them giving you a tour of their mind, what went through their mind the last time they were trying to accomplish this purpose. And the idea, it's a little scary to not have a list of questions, but there is a technique, a very specific technique that you follow to actually get to depth. And I think a lot of people have taken the courses are like, oh my God, this so helps, not only in doing research, but also like in becoming aware of what I'm doing, like when I'm talking to my mom, or, those kind of relationship things. It's really interesting. So the idea of being able to pay rapt attention and build rapport and sense those little ripples where you think there's a stone underneath the stream of inner thinking that you want to get at, so that you can find those. And what's beautiful about this is that ever since the beginning, 25 years ago when I was doing this, it's always been audio only. I've not done it in person unless it's a very specific reason for it. And most of the time it's just by audio. I don't even use video like we're doing now. And this helps. This is actually a bunch of studies have been done about this. This helps a person feel supported without being distracted by all the things visually that can cause you not to trust somebody, not to allow rapport to build. So listening deeply, I tell people it's like putting on a really heavy hat. And you might have some muscles for holding that hat up, but not for very long. And so you work at it just like you would train your body and your muscles. You need to train yourself to be able to hold that hat up there for longer and longer. It is not easy to do. It is not a state of mind that you will always be in. I've trained myself to be able to be in that hat for about an hour and a half or 2 hours now. But I'm exhausted afterwards, right? So speaking of hats, and speaking of exhaustion, after you've collected all this data, and I will generally do a listening session with about 5 people per thinking style, if I know the thinking styles. And I may want to understand a bunch of different thinking styles, or I may not know the thinking styles. Say start out with like 15 or 20 people. So we've got all that data and I'm exhausted from holding that hat on my head. But now I have to analyze it. So there's a very specific way of analyzing this. This is not sticky note land. This is not like, oh, just put everything on the wall and then you'll find affinities, they'll show up. And it's like, no, that is not good enough for us. What we're after is patterns. And in order to help us see the patterns, we have to recognize what a concept is. An analogy I just used this morning is that every listening session, every transcript is like a house. And there's a bunch of objects in the house that all of us recognize. There's a refrigerator, there's a stove, there's a bed, there's a couch, right? There's a rug. And so you go into that transcript and you try to find what those things are. They're all at depth. Those are depth type things. You'll find them and you'll summarize each one of them. Each of us that go into that transcript may summarize them differently, but they're all the same concepts. The only thing is that in reality, concepts are tangled up together. So you might have like a sofa oven, and one person calls it the sofa oven, and the other person's like, no, it's the sofa M oven. So you can untangle these things. You can learn how to do it, but it's fairly clear. The nice thing about doing summaries of all of it is that then later, when we go looking for patterns across different people, we can see them more clearly. And so pattern is super important. These are just 2 examples of what a summary looks like. You'll see that they're written in a certain way so that I can see the important points. So feel is the emotion, first person present tense. Alarmed is that emotion that I'm feeling. The key point is by the pickup that whizzed by me. So I can see where my focus of mental attention is. Realize on the next one is the key, is the verb, right? First person present tense. The key point, how close he came to hitting me. That's the inner thinking that's gone through my mind. That's where my focus of attention is. There are details that show up in the rest of each of those summaries, and they help me understand the context. So what happens when I start comparing these summaries across people is that I start to see, based on the focus of mental attention, the things that go together. It is clear. It is not like sticky notes on the wall going like, oh yeah, these things go together. Most of the time when I see people do that for the early days, they'll do it by noun. I have things to say about nouns. But anyway, this is just an image of how things are starting to come together, but I like looking at it diagrammatically. So here we see patterns. Every one of those towers in that diagram that looks like a city skyline is where we've got patterns. Every one of those towers is just 1 box high. That's a one-off. That's not a pattern yet, but it could be a pattern because we could go and collect more data and maybe more people will say something about it. So speaking of towers and city skylines, I kind of named the parts of these as if it were a city. So you've got the towers come together in blocks, the blocks come together in neighborhoods. And each window in that tower is actually a person. That is the summary from that person. So the really powerful thing here is that we've got people's words. We've got what they're saying right here, and we can say them out loud as if we are they. The other powerful thing is that we have thinking styles. We go through the same set of data differently, and we can come up with thinking styles that we can layer on top of this. You might be able to see some color in those little windows, and that represents what thinking styles are there. And then we can do some gap analysis. Super quick thinking styles. Basically, they're personas. Excuse me, I don't call them personas because personas have baggage and personas have this dual heritage from marketing and from Alan Cooper and Kim Goodwin. And sometimes they're done one way or the other, and sometimes they're done with or without research. And so I'm like, let's just use a different word to mean that it's coming from this kind of data. Thinking styles are a kind of archetype. They are deeply researched, and they're very specifically demographics free. They represent different philosophic approaches that people bring to a purpose. So we are not looking at the idea of like, oh, we're going to make something for this anecdotal story and that anecdotal story, but instead a pattern of stories, a pattern of philosophic approaches to this purpose that then we can create something for. And one of the wild things is that when I do this gap analysis, people will start to see, oh my God, we are only supporting one thinking style. Oops. So that's kind of fun. One other thing to say about this, I have so much to say, I can't fit it all in an hour, but demographics free is really important to note, because typically demographics don't cause the thinking toward a purpose unless what's happening has a history of causing inner thinking or emotional reactions or guiding principles, e.g. discrimination, e.g. something physiological. And so that's when I would build in some demographics with this. So here is one set of example thinking styles where the purpose was decide to get a new phone. That is, it came up as 3 different ones in the initial study. We might do more studies and find a 4th one, or like tweak one of these. You'll notice that it's not super deep. It's a series of summaries. It's a series of first person present tense, verb forward, key point sentences that represent kind of this philosophic approach and are stretchy enough to incorporate different contexts. And speaking of context, a person, when they're deciding to get a new phone, in one case, they might be and express themselves, but in another case, later, maybe after having kids or something, they may change to a different thinking style. So there's that kind of aspect. A thinking style is not a horoscope. Here's another set. This happened to be thinking styles where the purpose of the study was changing my personal identity. And we had 3 different ones here. So they're in the deck if somebody wants to check that out. So there's 3 more sections, but I wanted to just pause here and see if there was a question that was burning.
Yeah, we had a few questions. Juan was asking about thinking styles.
Mm-hmm. Asking what about thinking styles?
Juan?
He might be on mute.
I'm looking for the question because there's been some discussion going on. Juan, are you still with on this call? I think he just said, would you tell us a little bit more about the thinking styles?
Yeah.
I don't know if he's still on, but
Okay.
another one was from Hillary. She was asking if there's no list of questions. Go
Yeah, I
ahead.
had a couple of questions. So you said like I don't go into an interview with a list of questions, but I mean you have to go in with something guiding, don't you?
Nope.
Otherwise, you may hear about you want to ask them about digging their garden, not about what they had for lunch today.
That's the germinal question. What went through
Okay.
your mind, everything you went through your mind as you were digging your garden, you know, during whatever context it was you want to set. I teach a course on how to frame your study and how to recruit, because those two things go together. You don't want to recruit people who haven't done a lot of thinking about that purpose.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and with respect to Juan's question, I'm writing a book about thinking styles right now, and I do have a course about it. There's a lot to it. So, you know, we could be here for another 4 hours and get through it.
There is a follow-up question about thinking styles. Whoa. Okay, I just lost power. That's interesting.
Oh,
Well,
no.
so I'm just a black square now. But the question was how, let's see, it's from Rachel. How do you know you've identified all of the existing thinking styles, and how do you size which thinking style to prioritize?
yeah, that's stuff I can't really get into right now, but there is a way to do it. With respect to finding all of the thinking styles, you do study after study after study after study within one particular purpose, within related purposes. Your thinking styles are like a cast of characters for an episodic TV show, where you're going to eventually see the same characters in certain contexts. And there's like this one character that shows up in another context. It is a yearly thing. We do a little bit more research, little by little, and we recognize where to go next based on our organization's priorities, based on what we've learned, that sort of thing.
Thanks, Indi. I
Yeah.
guess the question why I'm asking is because I noticed that at least in my organization, the product folks, oftentimes they will target a known segment that is known to be the best, segment that our product caters to. And like very rarely would they go outside of that. So really it's almost like you're stuck in a segment, but there's thinking styles out there. So that's why I'm asking.
Here's a great analogy for that. When I did that research for the airline, their most important segment were business travelers. So they're like, oh, business travelers, that's how we define them. But what we found out was even within business travelers, there were different thinking styles. There was the thinking style of just get me there versus unfazed versus frustrated. And a business traveler could be any of those things given the context. So it was important to realize that there were these different approaches, and those are supposedly influencing the way that they create their services. So that might help.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's do the last three, and then I'll stop again for some more questions. So going back to this diagram, what we do with it is super important. So now we've got that city skyline. Great. What we do is we take all of our capabilities and we map them to the towers. So here, instead of thinking of our capabilities as the solution, we're looking at a person's purpose and the subparts of the purpose and saying, well, what of our things helps with this? And when we do that comparison, we can start to see weaknesses, and we can start to see exactly where we are not supporting certain thinking styles. This is downloadable from my website under examples. And one of the big things that I teach in one of my courses is how very specifically this particular client was like, oh my God, we think everybody's like us in our thinking style. And there's a whole world of this other thinking style out there that we're just not even thinking of. This is another image. This is simply rewording of the parts of the top part of that diagram so that you can use the words from jobs to be done. Jobs to be done, design thinking, all of these generally have something in the beginning, but they're like, go find out about the user, right? that word user tends to be from the perspective of the aperture that we allow ourselves to a customer as opposed to a person. So instead of using that user aperture, let's say purpose, instead of like process, right? Let's say the towers instead of people's jobs. And what's happening is we're just getting deeper data, just totally can swap this data in for what you would be normally looking for when you do jobs to be done, and go from there. It is very usable as a foundation for a lot of different situations. And what I want to, this is the one slide section. What I want to say is getting back to this idea of digital maturity. I would love to see in 10 years that we now create different paths for different thinking styles. Maybe those paths use completely different tones of voice. There was this one company that created, their focus is helping people lose weight. They did research and found 3 different thinking styles around losing weight, and had 3 different, completely different tone of voice, different things to do, packages to help somebody achieve that goal. And what I'd like to do is like, yeah, maybe we can use machine learning to recognize when somebody seems to be behaving according to a certain thinking style that we have already researched, and we can send them down that path that we designed for that thinking style, or at least tell them, hey, you know, right now you're on the generic experience pathway, and tell us some more about yourselves and we can get you on a more specific one. And I'm just showing the personal identity change thinking styles down here, just to give you an example. There would be very different solutions for these different thinking styles if you were doing something to help people with personal identity change. And then the other thing that I want to mention is that right now, the metrics that we use tend to do with the success of the team and the success of the org, and not with the success of the person trying to accomplish their purpose. We have a mental model diagram now that opportunity map can be used to frame what our usability tests could be, for example, and then we can use the results of that and layer it back onto that map. I have 5 different ways that I would like to see metrics created, but if we just look at number 3 there for today, the strength of support by thinking style, we would be taking a tower and we would say, of all the things we are doing underneath it, let's rate them by the strength of support by thinking style. Let's go frame usability tests, or let's frame some co-creation labs. Let's frame everything by that particular part of the purpose in that tower, and involve or invite participants who are of those thinking styles, and see if we can't learn more, and then map that data back onto the diagram. This is an example, it's all in Spanish, of doing just that, where they are mapping, they're using these towers to create the frames for more research, and then using the results of that to map back on here. If you don't use these as the frame, it's harder to map it back, because oftentimes usability test is just framed by the feature and not by a person's purpose or part of their purpose. So it's like, well, I don't know, where would you put it here? You can't. It doesn't relate. And it doesn't relate to what a person is trying to get done. So this is what I would really like to do, is see us measure by how well we're supporting people. So kind of in conclusion, I would love for us to take the responsibility of supporting people better. I would love to have deeper goals in our organization. The things that I think are missing right now are depth and patterns, and balance across the different research types on that one big diagram that I broke apart, and also ethics. a lot of organizations will just go ahead and harm people and see what happens. I'm like, that's not so nice. So let's pay a little bit more attention to this. There's a book Kenneth Bowles wrote called Future Ethics. It's a good one to pick up. And again, we are makers. We can make time. So that's my encouragement to everybody. Here is the slide where you can see how to get a hold of me. The next book that's coming. I'm also going to write a little tiny book about listening deeply. I have courses online. The next course that's coming up next week is about data analysis, qualitative data analysis, being able to do it correctly. And there's a lot of talks and resources and essays that you can access through my site or my Medium publication for free. So, oh, also there's the discount code up at the top for Rosenfeld Media, any book. Just type in Disappointed Falcon 20 and you will get that 20% discount. So thank you, thank you. I will open it up to more questions, but I'm sure a lot of people have to get going. Oops, I'm supposed to say stop sharing, not close. There we go. Questions.
I want to call out Practical Empathy. That book had a big impact on how I do research and active listening. The methodologies you've laid out in that book are amazing, and I think everybody should learn them. Like, it was a really big hit. Archie Miller, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He recommended that book to me when I worked with him.
Oh, cool.
And I, like, loved it. And I was like, oh, thank you.
Yay.
Jenny's asking, what was the name of the book?
Practical Empathy.
Practical Empathy.
Yeah, and it's also available on Audible.
Okay, that's good to know.
Cool.
I
So,
have a question too. Oh, okay. Yeah, this isn't totally exactly what related to the content, but it does touch upon it. So like those skylines, like I love those maps, but it's definitely a lot of labor of love, right? A lot of time. I guess my question is, in an organization that's very product minded, you know, very much like focused on user stories and whatnot, like how would you go about you know, convincing others to give the time to create an artifact like this that has like such a longevity?
yeah. So where are they getting their user stories right now?
A lot of them are basically, they just do like a very brief empathy session. Like usually that consists of like 2 hours or so of watching people do their work. And that's about it. And so oftentimes, I mean, we'd be lucky if we do 3 of them.
So yeah, no patterns there. Also, I don't think anybody has a telepathy server yet. So you don't know what people are thinking.
Yeah.
You're just observing, which is just full of your own assumptions and your own bias. So those are some pretty strong arguments right there. I see a lot of people relying on things that they've made up. And that's kind of risky.
We have one question from Scott.
Hi, thank you for this. This has really been fantastic. I often, our little firm often works with nonprofits. There's not a lot of, you know, there's less budget, obviously, for a lot of the discovery work and research. And often we're, you know, they're not creating products. They're often trying to connect with people through a singular portal, like a website. I'm just curious around, you know, we have the ability to do some interviews, but we also have mostly discovery sessions where we're getting a bunch of people in a room. I'm just wondering if you have any tips for making better use of those sorts of sessions in order to maybe, usually they're very directed. Is there a way to sort of, you know, sort of be a little bit more free form while collecting some of the kind of empathic data that we're talking about?
Empathy can only form one-on-one. It doesn't work in a group setting. because people feel too vulnerable to actually tell you what they really are going, what's really gone through their minds. It's also really what you're interested in is what has gone through somebody's mind, not what would go through their mind, or what is going through their mind immediately right now as they encounter something for the first time. So what I would recommend is, don't spend your money on that. I work with a lot of organizations that have very limited budget. And there are other ways to collect this data. There's also ways to find others, like in government and higher ed, they find others who have done this kind of data and share data. Sometimes the purposes aren't exactly the same, and different sets of thinking styles might come up for different branches, but there's really no, I don't see much value in doing group sessions. That's more of a marketing thing. And obviously I have opinions about marketing research. So maybe there's a way to do it, but that's not going to get you empathy. Does that help?
Well, yeah, it does. I wonder if there's that one-on-one. You mentioned sort of collecting some of the data through journaling and diary entries. I'm wondering if so. That seems, you're giving them homework. Then I'm wondering how effective that is compared to that.
Yeah.
Those sort of phone conversations.
It's so much easier to do the phone conversations. It's so much easier for both parties. One of the things that happens when I'm asking people for diaries and essays is that I have to give them examples of the depth that I need, and not everybody gets it.
Yeah.
Right. And it's homework. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you. That was really great. As usual, it's fun to have you live and in the flesh here. I love these concepts. I'm really big. I've heard before this idea of like surface level and depth level. It's something that I have attempted many times in my career, and I primarily work in B2B land. So you're talking to somebody, and what you're setting out to understand is like, what's this, what's your workflow, for example? What is it that you're trying to do? And I know that there's value in the like, why does this matter to you? But I find it very difficult in a B2B setting to get, in the professional setting, to get people to that depth. And I'm sure you consulted with companies. I'm just curious what kind of tips you have when you're dealing with B2B, because B2C is a little easier in that regard.
Yeah. I would say about a third of the studies that I've done have been B2B. And everything that you do as a part of your job has sort of a reason and a history why you do it that way. One of them was with a bunch of developers who were trying to use an SDK or an API to create whatever they needed to create, and running into trouble. And how did they figure out how to undo the trouble that they ran into? And so everybody there were like 3 different philosophic approaches that people had. There were sets of things that they did. One of the really interesting things was that a lot of people would say, I will get help from others, and so I'm always thinking about giving back. And that was a huge pattern that showed up that was surprising. So I've done something for a big multinational that was just around sort of my relationship to the organization. So sick days, vacation days, my employee reviews and things, right? Those sound really cut and dried, but still people they do thinking about it. Yeah. And there's different approaches. Yeah. So when you recruit, though, you don't recruit people who haven't done that much thinking or who aren't that interested in talking about it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a question from Rachel. Rachel, do you want to unmute?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Indi, I have another question. I know I asked quite a few. So I'm finding myself designing for a future role that does not exist yet. how would you go about formulating a purpose for a role that hasn't existed yet?
Give me, so like, it's got to be based on something that somebody wants to get done, right?
Yeah, it is.
That's the purpose.
It's more like the way that they go about doing things today, it's very much manual oriented. So their thinking of how things should be done is limited by manual tools. We're designing a platform for them. So like all they could tell us it really is like, I need to do this and this and this.
Right, but the bigger purpose, right? Now it can be, so purposes can be different levels of granularity. And if they're super granular, like I just need to record how much chicken feed the hens ate every week. And so I do that by weighing, you know, how much I put in there and then weighing how much is left there at the end of the week. Well, that, yeah, there's not, what's the purpose? What is the purpose? Is the purpose to forecast how much feed to buy? How do you make decisions about that? Or is the purpose to discover somebody stealing the chicken feed? Right? There's probably purposes around it, or it might be just too granular that there's not purpose around it. I don't know. I tried to select a really granular example, and there's still purposes around it.
Okay. I think I understand where you're going with it, because the thing is that you would never hear them tell you their purpose. They will tell you what they do day to day. Like, so really it's almost like up to the designers and the product folks to look at what they're saying and what is it pointing towards. So that's the purpose that they're doing this for. But yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Indi. Another question you mentioned earlier about market research. And I'd just be curious, you know, like what have you found, or what advice do you have around helping others in the organization kind of break through their own kind of particular method or approach of problem solving, or, you know, solution generation, or those kind of things that, you know, exist in every organization?
I have a technique, and it's called listening.
What a surprise.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we sometimes fail is at the organizational level. We're like, oh, well, that person is X and they believe X and they're always going to be X. And so I just, you know, I have these assumptions about that person, and maybe that's not true. Maybe they're thinking, well, I'm here, and so I have to think X. And maybe I've got a history of Y, and, you know, I could tell you why over lunch sometime. And I think relationship building is super important. Some of the most successful people that I've seen doing this build relationships over time. They sit down and listen with the people that they're working with the people who make decisions. They try to form connections with people outside of their, you know, initial group. And they work at it. It's hard. It takes work. If you're an introvert like me, it's like, oh my God, more of this. But it's what makes for the success, because I think unless you are surrounded by narcissists, when you listen to them, they will start to listen to you. And it makes it just easier. You can see things from their point of view. You can speak using their words and their philosophies. And you can even say, oh, that's your philosophy, and this is my philosophy. And like, that's why we have this weird argument all the time, you know? So I think that's my little approach to it. Might not be the only way to do it, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So thanks.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we are 25 minutes over.
Oh no, this is actually scheduled until 6:30.
Oh, okay.
So
All right.
I just wanted to make sure. Oh wait, one more message. Okay, this will be the last question.
Okay.
Mary Rose, do you want to just ask the question?
Yeah, I can hop on. Hi. Yeah, I just want to ask, do you have any advice or tips maybe on how to, sell your stakeholders on ending up in more of a place of having like a mental model and understanding of your customer versus a tactical, like these are the features we want to build? Because I feel like at the company I'm at, it's more of a startup, and our co-founders are very like, let's stay scrappy, let's just figure out the features, but they don't quite have that understanding of how having something like a mental model would be actually more valuable. So any tips for that kind of experience?
A mental model is so powerful for being able to pivot when you're at that stage of development, because you have all these other perspectives. You're like, oh, well, this no, but this yes. But besides that, the last two answers that I gave are so important. The relationship building for sure, so you can understand where they're coming from. But also this idea that it's risky. It's risky to make this stuff up. It's risky to just like put your finger in the air, or like so many people, I'm going to run down to Starbucks and ask everybody there, back before the pandemic, like, what do you think about my product? And that's like not framing it by purpose. That's not making sure you've got people who've done a lot of thinking about it. And that's also staying up at the surface level. You're not understanding people's actual inner thinking. If you want to help them achieve this purpose, this is important. Now, if you're Facebook and your purpose is really to sell advertising, but you've got this other audience that you have to attract so that the advertisers have, somebody to sell to, then you have a different thing going on, right? Then you have to like do some sort of hand wavy justice to attracting people to the platforms so that you can sell ads to them, which is like, it's not supporting people. Your goal is not to support that end person. Your goal is to attract them, engage them. That's why they have those engagement statistics in their metrics. And the people you're supporting are the advertisers. You're trying to deeply understand advertising. You're trying to deeply understand different philosophic approaches to advertising, etc. So if you can see that kind of a difference, and I don't know what the startup is trying to do, but if the startup is trying to support people, getting a good understanding of the people that you want to support is super important to the success and longevity and sustainability of your org.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. I don't know if that'll help. We'll see. It also depends on your founders.
Yeah, it's more of a B2B kind of application, but I think one of the challenges we have too is that the co-founders have very deep knowledge of the industry. So I think a lot of the times they think, oh, I'm an expert, I'm just going to go with this. Clearly, we don't need to do research. But
what's happening is that they're going all the way back in time and saying, oh, there's a standard way of doing it, and let's make it an algorithm. Right. And they're not considering the humanity involved, even if it's just the humanity of like trying to sign up for sick days. There are different philosophic approaches. It's important to be able to understand different people's situations or contexts where somebody would not feel empowered to sign up for a sick day, etc. Right. Cool. Well, thank you everybody for this time together.
This was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. And I just wanted to thank everyone for joining and making the time. And also we have another event coming up on March 9th with Jessica Duvernay, and she's the director of UX UI at RS21.
And I just want to thank you both for this evening, and also to remind people that to check out Indi's books and her courses on our website. That's listed on this event page for tonight's event, and we'll be sharing the codes also. to everyone. So anyway, thank you both. Thank you, Indi.
Yeah. I hope I am supporting you, my audience.
The whole community, right?
Definitely. This
Yeah.
is
Well,
great.
from all over the United States too. So
Yay.
I love it. Let's make it international next time.
yeah, I'm sure
Awesome.
it will go viral. I'm sure it will go international.
Yay. Well, thanks again. And I hope everybody has a good rest of their evening. And let us recognize our own power in being able to see a little bit further.
Yes. Thank you for the
And it
harm
looks
reduction.
like
Thank you.
we are already international because Magdalena joined us from Mexico.
Yay. Speaking of, I have a partner in Mexico who is translating my courses.
wow.
So yeah, I think
Wonderful.
two of them are available already. So that's Bibiana Nunez. So if you look for that somehow, you will find it. I've tweeted about it in the past, but you'd have to scroll back a whole long ways in my tweet history.
Great. Well, maybe Magdalena can spread the word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Will do.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Oh, wait,
thank
we
you.
still
This was
have
great.
Bob.
Thank
Have a good
you.
night.
Bye
All
now.
right. Have a good night. Bye-bye.